Being the appointed hour, we will call to order this meeting of the New Bern Historic Preservation Commission for the month of October. Morgan, would you like to call the roll?
Absolutely. David Griffith.
Here.
Joseph Anderson.
Here.
Stuart Cox.
Present.
James Woods. Karen McNair.
Here.
George Bright.
Here.
Jim Bisbee.
Here.
Joe Klotz. And Christian Evans.
Here.
All right, we have one.
Very well. I understand that we do have minutes this month that were uploaded to Dropbox for review.
Yes.
I'd like to call for a motion to dispense with the reading of those minutes.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, we will dispense with the reading of those minutes. Are there any substantive or factual corrections that anyone has to them? Okay, hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes as they appear.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, those minutes are approved. Just a little background and introduction to what we do here at our regular meetings. The Historic Preservation Commission is a public commission appointed by the City of New Bern's Board of Aldermen. It is responsible for preserving and safeguarding New Bern's locally designated historic districts, downtown and Riverside. Based on U.S. Department of Interior standards, state statutes, city ordinances, and New Bern's historic guidelines. Two of the major tasks of the HPC include approving applications for a certificate of appropriateness and preventing demolition of historic structures due to neglect. The HPC holds a quasi-judicial hearing on an application for a certificate of appropriateness, or COA. The Commission hears sworn testimony and evidence provided by the applicant, by parties who receive notice of the hearing, and by others who can justify that they have relevant evidence and are directly affected by the application. The Commission cannot consider comments based on personal likes or dislikes, hearsay, or personal opinion that cannot be directly related to specific historic guidelines. Likewise, commissioners shall refrain from stating personal opinion, personal likes or dislikes, or hearsay during the hearing. The Commission's decision on an application is based solely on testimony and evidence presented at a hearing that directly relates to the historic guidelines. Morgan, would you like to swear in anyone who plans to speak tonight?
All right. If you are presenting, speaking for, or against any applications, could you come forward, please? All together. Okay, everyone. Right hands up, please. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give this evening is true to the best of your knowledge? Of course. Oh, we got some travelers out there.
One more time.
One more time for everybody since we're all here. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give this evening is true to the best of your knowledge? All right. Thank you.
Very well, thank you.
Yep.
Just a summary of the hearing process for COA applications is what we'll do tonight. For each application, the HPC administrator will provide an overview of the application. The applicant or representative will present the application to the Commission. Proponents and opponents who receive notice of the hearing can present evidence. Rebuttal is allowed by the applicant and by proponents and opponents who receive notice. Others who can justify that they have relevant information will be directly affected can present evidence also. The HPC administrator then presents the staff's findings and recommendations. The applicant or representative then has an opportunity to make final comments on their application. Commissioners discuss the evidence and may ask for clarification from the applicant or presenters. Chairman will call for a motion to approve or deny the application with stated findings of fact. The motion is discussed by the Commission. Chairman then calls for a vote on the motion by the Commission. A COA can be approved with conditions, or denied. Do we have any old business to discuss?
Well, since we did not have the opportunity to meet in September due to the hurricane, those design review items will be tonight. So they're kind of old. So first up, I have 704 and 706 East Front Street, if you guys are ready to proceed.
Very well.
Okay. This was put forth by the city of New Bern. This is a request to remove 2 street trees in the primary ABC, 704, 706 East Front Street, and Foster Hughes with Parks and Rec is here to speak on behalf of the city.
Good evening, Commission members. The first tree I'll talk about is at 704 East Front Street. We are requesting removal of this water oak. Upon inspection of the tree, there is several areas of rot. The crown is missing in most of the tree, and staff recommends this be removed and replaced with a red rocket crepe myrtle. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have on this first item.
May we see the application on screen?
We'll just skip over the application. We'll just jump straight to the pictures if you guys don't mind. All right, so this is the water oak, right, Foster?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So that's the water oak. And this is a closer up view. Tom Glasgow, I believe, evaluated this tree, both of these trees. And,
He did.
And he made some notes that you all can see of some poor topping, some rot. Scroll down a little further. It's got a deformed root system. New and old wounds, increased likelihood of infection by some other diseases. Furthermore, scroll down a little farther, we can see this dark material oozing from advanced decay.
So it's been poorly pruned, has a significant decay, rather misshapen, and not in great shape in general any longer.
That's correct.
Okay, before it proceeds to the next tree on the list, does anybody have any questions, the applicant, on this one?
Okay with this one? Okay. So this one, let me zoom in on this because this tells the story better. It's got a U-cut. It's been very poorly pruned, unfortunately, with utilities over the course of many years. And let me back out a little bit so we can see this.
This is the second tree, and it happens to be right next door.
Just happens to be next door. It's got some old pruning wounds, more decay. It's an old pruning wound that's hanging over the sidewalk. Another old wound closer to the major multi-fork trunk. You can see that dark oozing mass in the middle. And attached, you'll see some recommendations that Mr. Glasgow provided, along with some suggested replacement trees that would not interfere with the utilities. There we have it.
And there is written testimony included a report
That is correct.
by an independent expert.
Yes. Mr. Glasgow works for the Craven County Cooperative Extension. He's a horticulture agent. He went up there and did an analysis for the city.
Okay, very well. Let's just make sure of a couple things before we continue. None of the commission members have a conflict of interest with the application, correct? Hearing none. And there are no issues that anyone has with the completeness of the application. Hearing none as well. Are there any members of the public who have been notified about this application that would like to speak for or against it? Okay, hearing none. Are there any questions that the commission has for our applicant?
Are they both water oaks? Are both trees water oak?
One is a water oak and the other is an American sycamore. The American sycamore is at 706.
Okay. And which tree are you going to replace that with?
Staff recommended a red rocket crepe myrtle for both of those, mainly because of the low-hanging power lines.
Okay, any further questions, comments? Maureen, would you present the staff's findings and recommendations, please?
Absolutely. Staff submits the following historic district guidelines as appropriate to this application. Utilities 235 and landscaping 241. Statements of reason based on the information contained in the application in staff's judgment are the proposed project is located within the primary ABCs. The mature trees have been evaluated by the county extension director. The trees shall be replaced with tree species that will not interfere with overhead utilities at maturity. And the proposed project is not incongruous with the guidelines. And staff recommends the commission approve the applications for major exterior alterations at this time, citing the aforementioned guidelines and with the condition that the replacement tree be replanted within 6 months.
Thank you. Does the applicant have any final comments?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners, any discussion? It seems
Well,
very
I
straightforward.
have a comment. I will just say, thank you for bringing this forward. I did drive under that tree, the one that's like a big U, and I was concerned that that branch was going to fall as I was driving under it. It looked pretty shaky. So thank you for bringing this issue forward.
All right, with hearing no further discussion, would anyone care to make a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I would make a motion. I move that we find the application for 704 and 706 East Front Street for a certificate of appropriateness to be not incongruous with New Bern's Code of Ordinance sections 15411 to 15429 and New Bern's Historic District guidelines based on the following specific guidelines and findings of fact. And the applicable guidelines are utilities 2.3.5 and landscaping 2.4.1. And the findings of fact are that the proposed project is within the primary ABCs. The mature trees have been evaluated by the county extension director, and the trees shall be replaced with a tree species that will not interfere with the overhead utility maturity. And also the proposed project is not incongruous with guidelines. And I do have a condition that the replacement trees be put in within 6 months.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and we have a second. Is there any further discussion on the motion?
Who made that second? Thank you, John.
Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes. Anyone care to make a motion to issue a COA?
So
moved.
Have a motion, do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion to issue the COA is approved.
All right, thank you, Foster.
Thank you, sir.
There was a third tree originally in this package. That one.
I remember that. I believe it was pulled from the
It was,
application.
Carrie requested that we remove that from the application at this time. I don't know what their plans are currently with that one, but I'm sure that they'll bring it back to us when they're ready.
Very well.
Okay. Ready?
Next.
Okay, next up, we have 722 Pollock Street. And this is to include a request to install a wooden 6-foot privacy fence in the secondary and tertiary ABCs. And they are here this evening to present.
What we want to do here is excuse me, put a fence to extend on the east side of the backyard. It would be, let's see, 6 foot high, and what did I have here for? And a 31 foot, 1 inch by 6 foot high wood panel fence to replace existing fence that is in disrepair. Fence is to be installed on east side of property line. Fence will be built 3 foot from the shed. Support posts will be set in concrete.
Okay, I think Morgan's bringing up the application so we can see the drawings.
And I'm sure you're familiar with these homes right here on Pollock Street. And this is a site plan that will show you the location of the fence. And that's what they are proposing. 6 foot tall,
Yes.
wooden, of course. Pine dog ear, and it will be 4 of those panels that will be put together. And I will zoom in a little bit here so you can see the existing fence. And the photo to the right, that's the fence that's going to be replaced. You can see how it's leaning. And that's the end of the pictures.
Okay, could you slide back to the site plan, please?
Mhm.
Just so we can be clear of where that is. Okay, so going down the driveway to the right of your house, sort of at the back corner of the neighbor's house, all the way to the back corner of the property, that's the piece that you're
Correct.
proposing to replace. Okay, and nothing further than that. Right. Okay. Thank you. Do you have anything further that you'd like to add this time?
No, I'm fine.
Okay. Is there anyone who has received notice of this application who would like to speak for or against it? Okay, very well, hearing none. Commissioners, we have no conflicts of interest and no concerns about the completeness of the application. Very well. Let's see. Morgan, would you care to provide staff's findings and recommendations?
Certainly. Staff submits the following sorts of guidelines as appropriate to this application. Fences and garden walls, 251 and 253, and statements of reason based on the information contained in the application in staff's judgment are: the proposed project is located within the secondary and tertiary ABCs. The proposed materials and design is appropriate, and the proposed project is not incongruous with the guidelines, and staff recommends that the commission approve the application for major exterior alterations at this time, citing the aforementioned guidelines with the condition that the fence be stained or painted.
Thank you. Commissioners, any discussion, any further questions of the applicant?
This was a wooden fence?
Yes, wooden fence.
It's proposed at 6 foot tall, which is appropriate for tertiary areas. Materials are appropriate. It's called for a stain finish, which is also perfectly acceptable. If there's no further discussion or any questions, would anyone care to make a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion. I move that we find the application for certificate of appropriateness for 722 Pollock Street with New Bern's Code of Ordinance, sections 15411 to 15429, and New Bern's Historic District Guidelines based on the following specific guidelines and findings of fact. And I skipped over, it is not incongruous. That guidelines, cited guidelines are fences and garden walls, 2.5.1 and 2.5.3. And the findings of fact, the proposed project is located within the secondary and tertiary ABCs. The proposed materials and design are appropriate. The proposed project is not incongruous with the guidelines. And I would like to attach the following condition that the fence be stained or painted.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a couple of those there. You can choose from. Is there any discussion on the motion? Okay, I would like to offer one thing that we might add to this if you're amenable. Just because we've had questions about this in the past when people are removing fences, I think we ought to consider adding a caveat that before the existing fence is removed, that ownership of the fence is verified, so that no one's mistakenly removing someone else's fence.
And Ms. Karen, do you agree to that?
Yes, I do.
And I think, who was the second? Was it Christian? Jim.
I did,
Do you agree to that?
yes.
Okay, noted.
Okay, any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. Would anyone like to make a motion to issue a COA?
So moved.
Second?
Have a motion and a second. Any discussion on that? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? COA is granted.
All right,
Okay,
thanks, guys.
Thank you, sir.
thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next up, we have 310 Bern Street. This is the Tryon Palace Foundation, and JKF Architecture is representing them. This is a request to remove asbestos siding and replacing with a hardy board in the primary, secondary, and tertiary ABCs. And I have the drawings, and he has them as well, so I'm going to pull them up for you real quick.
And Mr. Chairman, I need to recuse myself since I work at Tryon Palace.
Very well. Would anyone like to make a motion to recuse Joe from this particular application?
And you're welcome, you can put that on
Second.
this if you
We
want.
have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Yeah, just
Very well.
put existing to be- And let me switch it over to scanner mode. Can you guys see that okay? Let me zoom in slightly for you. How's that? Is that okay? Is that okay?
Good evening. I'm John Farkas, principal with JKF Architecture out of Greenville. We're the architect working with the North Carolina Department of Cultural Resources, and we are renovating, or at least doing the exterior first phase of the Douglas building, basically doing a complete repair and restoration of the exterior of the building, as everything from roof shingles to siding to windows has deteriorated over the years. So we're basically restoring all the windows as they are. We're putting a new roof on it, restoring the cupola, all like materials. The only place that we ran into an issue was on there's two ends of the building on the crossing T, which I guess is part of the original fellowship hall. And it's here and here. All that material is a asbestos siding material. It's deteriorated. It has to be abated just to be removed. And of course, we can't put the same material back. But we found a replica. There's a couple different replica shingles, such as a Certainty shingle that basically looks just like it. It's made for restoring those type of things. So we want to basically put that back in those locations on these two gable ends here. Everything else is pretty much as it is. We're restoring, repointing the brick. We're removing the paint on the siding and putting it back on some of the wood trim as well. The windows are all being restored as they are. So everything's an in-kind replacement except for that item.
Very well. We've resolved one conflict of interest with the commission. Does anyone have any issues with the completeness of the application? Okay, very well. If there are no further comments that you have at this time, we'll move to public comment.
Answer any questions you have.
Okay, we might get there once we start deliberating. But before that, is there anyone who has received notification about this application that would like to speak for or against it? All right, hearing none there. Commissioners, discussion, questions for the applicant? I will say I remember when this came in for design review, and it seemed like greater than 90% of all your scope of work items are replacement in kind and repair. And the only replacement that's not quite in kind is, as you stated, you cannot reinstall asbestos fibered shingles.
Right. We don't want to put that back. That's the Certainty product that we've used as a basis of design. There's down on the bottom there's three different profiles of the shingle. One is a wavy bottom, one is a step bottom, and the other is just sort of a straight bottom on the shingles. And we're using the one that's basically what they call a parity shingle, or purity shingle, which is actually an undulating bottom on those shingles, and it basically replicates what's there.
Very well. Now, as public bid work, you can't be sure exactly which brand you're going to get.
Correct.
But
Well, there's equals to this as well. So,
Correct.
And they're all comparable and equal products. So.
Okay, very well. Any other questions that we might have for the applicant? Any discussion amongst ourselves?
It was a very complete application. Very thorough.
Yes, thank you for that. All right. Morgan, would you like to present staff findings?
Staff submits the following historic district guidelines as appropriate to this application. Contemporary materials, 552 and 555. Statements of reason based on the information contained in the application and staff's judgment are: the proposed project is located within the primary, secondary, and tertiary ABCs. The proposed material will match the existing asbestos siding in appearance and design. And the proposed project is not incongruous with the guidelines, and staff recommends the commission approve the application for major exterior alterations at this time, citing the aforementioned guidelines.
All right, very well. If there's nothing more that the applicant would like to say or no further discussion, be glad to entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion. I move that we find the application for a certificate of appropriateness for 315 Bern Street to be not incongruous with New Bern's Code of Ordinance, sections 15-411 to 15-429, and New Bern's Historic District Guidelines, based on the following specific guidelines and findings of fact. Excuse me. Contemporary materials 5.5.2, 5.5.5, and the findings of fact. The proposed project is located within the primary, secondary, and tertiary ABCs. The proposed material will match the existing asbestos siding in appearance and design, and the proposed project is not incongruous with the guidelines.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
So moved.
Okay, any discussion on the motion? All right, hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion passes. Would anyone care to make a motion to issue a COA?
So move.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, COA is issued.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you, John.
Okay, so that brings us to 220 Pollock Street. This is a request to install a wooden lattice screen in the tertiary ABC and secondary, and a wooden gate with an arbor in the secondary ABC. And they are here this evening, and I'm just going to take control of the scanner and present it to you all.
Good evening. My name is Mike Gleason. I represent Denise and Michael Gleason at 220 Pollock.
You're all set.
What I want,
Would you like to zoom out for you?
yeah, please. Just,
Stop right there.
that's great. Super. Thank you, Mark. What I have here is our site plan. This is a projection of our architectural landscaping of our property. And what you're looking at is starting from Pollock Street and looking north down the property line. This is our current driveway. This is the home itself. At the secondary ABC of the property, highlighted in orange, is a proposed arbor that we would like to put in this property. This particular arbor stands alone. It is anchored by posts on either side. And this is a picture of the arbor, except that this picture is in, our arbor will be white. So what you're looking at is a gate with a wooden arbor around it. Coming off of it will be fencing, so to speak, that will be connected to posts. This projection gives you the idea of what it is. Except instead of just the gate that's shown in this particular drawing, this would be where the arbor and the gate would be. You'll have diagonal fencing that's connected to two posts, which are then going through the driveway. We'll remove part of the driveway, drive stays down, secure it with cement so that the arbor is secured. This is in this secondary ABC. So what you're looking at is the corner of the house. This currently is a lift, and this is the corner of the house, and there is a call post currently there, and just inside that post will be the arbor. And it connects to, this is a existing wall between the Hannah House property that we are tangent to. Would you like to see any of the pictures from that?
Well, what's the, describe the character of the fencing that you're proposing again. You said diagonal fencing?
Yes, sir.
Can you speak up a little bit louder, please?
Yes. This essentially, in this projection, just to show you the difference, this is showing, it's kind of hard to see from where you are, but the fencing has the diagonal look to it. You know, it's not vertical and horizontal. and it will be continuous across both sides. So as you approach this portal, coming up the driveway, you would see this entity of it. Is that okay? You would see this portal entity, and from either side of it, connected to the arbor, will be the fencing that will have this type of, there you go. That's much better. Thank you so much, Morgan.
Okay, so it's the same sort of lattice that appears in the two gates.
Correct.
Just
it's
in
a
a
continuous
rectangular-
visual appearance. There's not a differentiation between the two.
It is wood, though.
Correct. It is wood.
And it's gonna go across the whole back part of your home?
It will connect. Currently, our home. Yes.
It
This is
closes up the alleyway there.
Correct. This is currently a driveway. Even though this projection shows it kind of like it's brick, that's a future projection of what we might be doing. But this is currently just concrete, existing. If you've been on the property, this is concrete all the way, and it ends at the existing end of our new cottage. At this particular point, this is right where the lift is. And this is the existing corner of the house, and we will be adding the arbor in this secondary area. Any questions about that? Let's see. It was 8 feet, yes, that's correct. This is an 8-foot arbor. In the previous discussion, I think someone asked a question if it was as high as the fence. It is. It is since it's a standalone, it is 8 feet. From the top of what looks to be the cornice decoration to the bottom of the post.
Now, wasn't there another portion of this application that installed a fence on the border wall?
That is correct. I was
Okay.
just referring
Okay.
to this particular item. Just wanted to clarify any questions before I moved on.
The other drawing doesn't show that, though. I'm getting confused by what that.
Okay. This particular drawing, all I did was to show how we were going to connect it to the
Okay.
existing posts to give you
So
an
over
idea.
that gate, there's an arbor.
Correct.
Okay.
In between these two posts, instead of just the gate, you would be looking at
Okay.
this piece right here,
Got
just to give you an idea. So substitute the arbor for this gate in this projection.
Okay.
I think we had some questions earlier in the investigation meeting about what it might look visually, and that's it right there. That's the proposal for this entity. Okay. In addition to our application, we are, let's see if I can get this up a little bit. Can you see that? It's the highlight. Let me see if I can, how about that? That'll work right there, yes. Okay. One of the questions we had earlier in our meeting is this connected? In this projection, you can see that it is not. The highlighted in yellow is the tertiary in the ABC for what is we're referring to as a live screen. Currently, there is a wall separating the two properties that we share. The actual property line goes down the middle of the wall between the Hannah house and us. And currently, there is nothing on that wall. It is not a static wall. It changes in elevation with the property as you go down. And what we are proposing is from our existing fence, that's a 6-foot-high wooden fence, that we are going to continue down that from where it ends currently and have a visual screen that's a wooden screen. And essentially what you'd be looking at is something to this nature. Yeah. Just to give you a little visualization of it. Okay, there you go. You can see that the posts are anchored to the ground. They're not anchored to the top of the wall. This would be wood, and we would have live plants on this. In lieu, we considered having just as an example, like a Leland cypress or some other plant that's indigenous to the area going up, but in lieu of that, we decided to use a visual screen to kind of separate the properties. With discussion with our neighbors and whatnot, we talked about that we would like to differentiate the two properties and create a safety barrier, because currently that wall is about mid-shin, and someone could easily fall over that wall onto their air conditioning units, as well as their koi pond and some other things that might end up in the ER. Since we will be having multiple guests with our venue, the safety factor was a huge precursor to this idea, as well as giving a visual barrier between their property and our property. Assuming that when people come in, we wanted to give them just the venue some privacy, and as well as offer privacy for our neighbors as well. So again, what this entity would be along this wall, with it's highlighted in yellow, and it would be up on, it wouldn't be on the wall itself. It would be anchored here in posts in the dirt. Currently, one of this is partial concrete, but we have already cut part of the concrete out to begin to do this landscaping as we're beginning to put in our hardscape. So we'll have to, for these posts, we may have to remove a little bit more of that driveway to get the post security for the live stream. Do you have any questions?
Go back over the height of that. It starts at ground level, then inside the brick wall,
It will be
and
6
it goes
feet.
up about 8 feet.
Well, we're trying to keep it at 6 feet. I believe that is
That's the height.
that's what the covenants dictate, correct?
So
Yes,
the gate is 8 and the fence is 6.
correct.
6 from the top of the wall or 6 to the ground?
6 from the ground.
I thought it was 6 from the top of the wall as the application presented.
That idea was if we were going to start from the top of the wall, but we decided for security and just the logistics of it all to actually secure it to the ground. Plus, the wall gives it some more security as it up against it. It just allows that in case somebody were to lean against it.
Well, I'm not talking about where it's mounted. I'm just talking about the height above grade. You
Yes.
just said 6 foot above
Yes.
the ground.
Correct. And I believe that's what we just thought was the rule. So that's what we're going to go with.
Okay. I thought it was proposed differently, that's all.
Yeah.
I don't.
I knew the 8 foot was a sticking point, and I thought it was against the covenants of the fencing, so to speak, because it is an extension. So we're going to go with the 6 feet.
Okay. Any further comments before we go to public comment?
If you don't have any questions for me, no.
Well, we may have some when we get to our own discussion, but is there anyone who has received notice on this application that would like to speak for or against it? Okay, hearing none. Commissioners, any conflict of interest issues or any concerns about the application's completeness? Okay, hearing none. Morgan, would you like to provide staff findings and recommendations?
Certainly. Staff submits the following historic district guidelines as appropriate to this application. Guidelines for fences and garden walls, 252, 253, and statements of reason based on the information contained in the application. Staff's judgment are the proposed project is within the secondary and tertiary areas of visual concern, and the proposed materials are appropriate, and the height is congruous with the guidelines now that the applicant has amended their application. And staff recommends the commission approve the application for major exterior alterations at this time, citing the aforementioned guidelines, and although the applicant's already agreed to this, with the condition that the height limitation of the gate and fence and lattice screening be limited to 6 feet in height, as I mentioned previously, and the arbor height be approved as submitted.
Very well, thank you. Commissioners, discussion, any further questions or clarifications for the applicant?
Is the lattice fencing that is in the tertiary ABC painted white as well?
Correct.
Everything is white?
It'll be continuous of the current white fence that exists already.
And so the arbor that you want to put in, it's part of the fencing on the other side? So you're going to have a fence on either side of that arbor?
Correct. It's differentiated from the fencing that we're referring to in the tertiary view, but yes, it will have, the arbor has lattice work wood fencing that goes and extended out to the two posts as in the diagrams I showed you.
Okay, well, I think we've had discussion before about the height of an arbor put in the middle of a fence, have we not? And the height of that?
Well, we have on a previous application, I believe the one you're referring to was the one down on Middle Street adjacent to BTN. And the sticking point on that one was that what they were proposing essentially was an accessory structure in the primary ABC. Because we do consider arbors built like this one is proposed to be an accessory structure, which are perfectly appropriate in secondary and tertiary ABCs. This one is placed in a fence line, which is in the secondary ABC and right at the border to tertiary, actually.
That's correct. And those were more like pergola types of structures as well, adjacent to a fence. That's accurate.
Well, yeah, I think another issue with that one that we might be remembering is its overall character compared to this one. But we do consider those accessory structures which are perfectly acceptable and are not subject to the same height limitations as a fence.
I guess I'd like to see a picture of what the height and the mass of that in relationship to the wall on either side in the house. Because your picture with 8 foot looks kind of massive and big. So I'd like to see some picture of it all put together.
Okay, well, the picture that I showed you is from the manufacturer. That is obviously, I believe this manufacturer is in Maine. So I don't have access to, an existing particular item like this that's local that I could possibly take a picture of.
Can you put the picture back up again?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
The reason I'm asking for that is I don't have any sense of even any spatial framework in which that's going to exist. For instance, how wide is your driveway? How wide is the space from the, if you're in your driveway looking at this, what is the space on the right-hand side? What is the space on the left-hand side? How is it going to attach to your wall? And is it a post on the other side that it's going to attach to?
Okay, let me see if I can allude to answer your questions. And Morgan, I may have to have you enlarge this for me. Okay. Please. That's close. That's good enough. That'll work. All right. Let's go back down this way. Yes. Okay. All right. What we're proposing is that this particular arbor, and it does look fairly massive, especially when we have it on large. Currently, the driveway is approximately about 9.5 to 10 feet wide, and it is concrete. And what we're proposing is to use this arbor in the middle and then extend out to posts. And again, I don't know what you're saying, that this is a rendering that doesn't exactly show our dimensions, but the idea is that what you'd be looking at is possibly something in this nature, and instead of this post being out here and showing all this would be in this nature because of the mass of the arbor. It will be diagonal fence, and this post would be here. That would be an approximate distance of probably 6 feet, because currently there's landscaping in between the home and the driveway, and it'll have to encompass that, and that's where the post will be secured. The fencing will then come out probably a foot or two into the driveway until you start getting into the mass of the arbor. And that fencing would then continue to that post. This is a swinging gate. It's approximately 4 feet wide. To give you, if that helps at all, this is a 4 foot. Okay. Well.
I mean, I hear your words, but I mean, I'd like an architectural drawing of it all put together in relationship to the space that you are referring to.
Okay, well, maybe I can, if you've ever seen me play Pictionary, I generally lose, but I'll give it a shot. Essentially, what you'd be looking at, going down the secondary view, so you'd be looking north down our driveway. You would have a driveway that would be going down. You're looking down the side of the house. In this area where the arbor would be, you would have an arbor approximately 8 feet tall. You would then have extended lattice that would come out from it. Let me actually give it to you vertically without trying to show some of that. You would have lattice coming out, post, horizontal support, and you would have the lattice here. This is approximately 4 feet in width, 8 feet in height, and then you would have a repetitive side to the other side. Posts. This is the wall, retaining wall in between the Hannah house, which is to the right, and the Jarvis house to the left. In this area here currently is a landscaping barrier that's in this area. If you were to walk up the driveway, you would see various landscapes in here going up the side. This area here is the existing, or the proposed gate in here. And again, latticed out. Latticed out. Latticed out.
Good job.
So,
I know people with design degrees can't do that. So,
okay.
Very well.
So, and again, I'm approximating here with, and I'm a tape measuring here, but essentially you're probably looking anywhere from 11 feet to 10 feet from here to this side of the Jarvis house, and essentially the same to, or maybe probably more like 8 to 9 feet, and this would be 8 to 9 feet to the current brick wall that's about mid-shin at that point to the Hannah house.
That sounds like a pretty wide drive. You said before the driveway's about 10 feet.
Yeah, it's your standard driveway. I will tell you that it's exactly within a quarter of an inch of what something that takes away a dipsty dumpster can get down my driveway, and he has very enough room to get down there, so it would hold a loader truck.
The span is wider than the 10 feet though, because you have
Correct.
the guardrail.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. What's the total span, like 12 or 13 feet?
Yeah, I would dare say, from Alpha to Omega here, you're probably looking at 14 feet in all,
14.
possibly.
And the fences, the 2 side fences would be 6 feet in height, and the arbor 10 feet at the apex.
Yes.
This distance
Okay.
would be 8 feet.
Right.
And this distance is
And the
4
space
feet.
between the 2 posts
They're not 6
are
feet,
4
are they?
feet, 4 feet wide.
No, I would dare say, just by looking here, and you see the nature of the curves that are involved here, you're probably looking at 3.5 feet or so, and then it begins to swoop up to possibly 5.5 to 6 feet, but probably no more. But looking at it, this is 8. Just from the drawing, I would dare say on scale that's probably less than 5.5 feet tall at the top.
And that's also the height of the side fences.
Right. If this is 8 feet, then I would dare say that this is probably no more than 5 feet in height. Just based on scale here, assuming that this is 8, I would dare say.
But you're going 6 feet on the side fences, though, not 5. 6 feet.
Right, exactly. It would actually be the height that comes off of here, so you're probably looking at less than 6 feet on the actual fencing itself.
It's a different height than the wall you're talking about on the side.
Correct. The tertiary fence is a completely
Yeah.
different animal.
Completely different, okay.
That is trying to keep in congruence of the current existing fence that goes along the perimeter of the Jarvis property from the deed side, and it goes down one side and back down the other. It is all 6-foot fencing that's existing and is white.
Does that help with your visualization?
That does not, and I appreciate your efforts and the fact that you could sit there and draw it, but usually when we have persons present stuff to it, you know, we have some type of architectural drawing that gives the exact height, the exact width, because you're saying it's about this, it's about that, so that it's a much clearer picture, and again, the picture is in relationship to, I guess the house is on your left and there's the open space between your house and the other house on the right. So what I'm asking for is more of an architectural rendition with what this is really going to look like and the heights of each of those. Is that not usually what we have in terms of fencings and gates when people have presented that to us?
That's true. Many people do produce full drawings.
Right. So I'm going to use your term, a full drawing. So I would like to see a full drawing because, and I appreciate your efforts, but for you to say, well, I think it's this height, that it's going to be this height, that's difficult to envision with you just sitting here saying that. So I'd like to see a full architectural drawing of what you are proposing at that site.
Okay. So if I heard your question correctly, if you had numerical dimensions, that would be helpful?
Well, in an architectural drawing, that's usually what's presented to us.
Okay, all right. And in that architectural drawing, you would be looking for, dimensions of the arbor? Is that what you're referring to?
Dimensions of the arbor, what the material is in the arbor, the dimensions of what it is attached to, where it is attached to the house, how that's going to happen.
I don't know if this, I did bring some of this, let's see. See if I can get this to fit on here. See if this is helpful. Okay, so again, this is the dimensions that we're looking at for this particular arbor. Okay, it's a Spindle Top Arbor that's labeled here. It looks like the D width here is about 52 inches. The C width or C length, the height from the bottom to the top is C, which is approximately 93 3/4 inches. So you'd be looking at, let's see, 8 feet.
7, 9, but yeah.
Closer to 9, but 8 feet. Again, and then this particular projection is, these numbers are for this, but it would be this particular arbor.
That's a side view of it.
Correct.
What's the B width?
This is this turn this way.
Right, yeah, what's the width
if
of
you turn
that?
it this way, you get this projection here.
Right, what's the dimension of that?
What letter?
B. Is
B.
that B?
B is the width
Right,
of this.
yes.
It looks to be 37 1/2 inches,
Okay.
I believe.
So I appreciate you trying to provide this information, but I will tell you this is not helpful to me. I would like to see a picture, as I said, an architectural rendition of what this looks like with all of these dimensions on there all in one place so that it can be viewed all in one place.
Okay, so just to be clear, you want this particular drawing but placed within a picture of our driveway? Is that what you're saying, Ruth?
Well, whatever you want to present to us to approve, yes.
All right.
But it all needs to be put together, as I said, in relationship to your house. So your house is on the left-hand side there, right?
Mhm.
So that the height of your house in relationship to the height of this, in relationship to what is on your right-hand side. And just a looking down at that does not give any representation of that at all.
Okay. I'll present that to my architect and see if he can meet your requirements.
There's a couple of ways we can move forward with this. If the applicant would like to come back at the next monthly hearing, which we actually have one on the 30th, so you wouldn't have to wait a full month. But if you would like to offer to do that, we can certainly entertain that. Sorry, go ahead.
I would.
Okay.
If that is acceptable to the,
Well, the other option would be that we as a commission take a vote on whether we believe the application is complete as is, or if a majority of us feel that more information is required.
well, I would like to take it to a vote first before we go to option B.
Well, and that's perfectly fine. I guess the way to do, we haven't done this before, but I guess the way to do this would be to,
Sorry, I'm trying to process some legal thoughts here. If someone were to make a motion to, I'm just going to throw this out there, approve as presented, and the motion fails, then someone could make a motion, and I need someone to say exactly the meeting, time, date, and location. I propose that we continue this public hearing until X date, time, place, location. So that's how it would have to go.
okay.
What's the staff recommendation?
Excuse me? What's the
What's the
staff
staff
recommendation?
recommendation?
Excuse me, let me shuffle my papers. Staff recommends that the commission approves the application for major exterior alterations at this time, citing the aforementioned guidelines, and I mentioned some conditions that they've already satisfied, but to reiterate, with the condition that the height limitation of the gate and the fence and the lattice screening be limited to 6 feet in height, and that the arbor height be approved as submitted.
Okay, so where we are in this, you've presented the overview, the applicant has presented, we've asked for notified members of the public, anybody for or against, there was none. We proceeded on to our discussion, we've heard the staff recommendations. But we also did have the point in which we asked commission members if they have any issues with the application being complete, and heard none at that point. That doesn't mean we can come back to that if necessary and determine that amongst ourselves. We can either do that, or we can entertain a motion and see if it goes up or down, as you said.
And the catch is that the motion will have to die. It can't be, for example, 2 in favor and everyone, the majority is against. Then the motion would have to die for lack of a second.
I have a question.
I know it's getting convoluted.
I have a question for the administrator. Morgan, on the statements of reason,
Yes, sir.
number 3, it says the height is,
And I changed that
okay. I have
based
an
upon
older
what they
version.
presented this evening, that the height now is congruous with the guidelines, because previously during design review, we were talking a lot taller.
Okay.
And they brought some more information this evening, and that's why I changed my recommendation number 3.
So it should say that the height is not incongruous.
Is not incongruous.
Okay.
Thank you for correcting
Okay,
me.
I'm clarified on that.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I think the thing to do here would be to, if there is no further discussion and no further questions for the applicant, I would ask to entertain a motion. If it dies for lack of a second, then we know where we're going.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to attempt a motion. I move that we find the application for 220 Pollock Street, a certificate of appropriateness for 220 Pollock Street to be not incongruous with New Bern's Code of Ordinance, sections 15.411 to 15.429, and New Bern's Historic District Guidelines based on the following specific guidelines and findings of fact. Guidelines for fences and garden walls, 2.5.2 and 2.5.3. Findings of fact, the proposed project is within the secondary and tertiary areas of visual concern. The proposed materials are appropriate. The height is not incongruous with the guidelines, and I do have a condition that the height limitation of the gate, fence, and ladder screening be limited to 6 feet in height, and the arbor height be approved as submitted.
We have a motion, do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, so we got our second, so we're moving forward. Is there any further discussion on the motion?
I'd just like to say, I walked by down the driveway, and I can visualize what you're trying to do, and I'm okay with it.
And so,
I think it's,
and I have done the same thing, and I agree.
I agree. You said that it's within your property guidelines because it's on your side of the brick.
That's correct.
Okay, any further discussion on the motion that might change its nature or offer an amendment? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Opposed.
All right, I believe that carries 6 to 1. Would anyone like to offer a motion to issue a COA?
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Yay.
Okay, same thing, 6 to 1. COA is granted.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good picture.
Thank you.
All right, guys. All right, moving forward now, we have 314 Avenue C. And this is Shannon Core, and we have a laundry list, so bear with me here while I read off all the things. This is a request to install a shingle roof, remove the existing metal roof, a slight change in the roofing height, removal of 2 vent flues, demolition of an accessory structure, installation of wooden handrails, removal of 2 front porch columns and installation in the place of them wood tapered columns, enclosure of the mortar foundation, removal of 2 windows in the rear, and installation of some glass sliding doors, and the addition of a wooden deck.
Okay, very well.
This is a craftsman's house that's been, over the years, changed and changed and changed. We're trying to bring it back to kind of, as much as we know about the house, bring it back to the original look and style of that house. And so what we have is we're trying to change the columns on the front. There's 3 columns on each side. There's 1, 2, and there's 1 on the side. And they're going to be tapered like the craftsman style. Also, let's see if I can get you a side view of that. There's the side view. You can see it. And those are the tapered columns.
This is the back side.
And that's the back side of it, which is all the same. We're putting brick wall underneath the foundation, putting a little brick foundation wall underneath it to close off the crawl space. And it's going to look sort of like this. It's going to be indented 1 inch. The profile will be 1 inch in. And you can see how it's going to look. and we will have flood vents in it. This would be the handrail up on the front porch. Well, it's gonna look 2-inch pickets, all wood rails, 2x4, tapered top, tapered bottom. Also, this is the other, well, this is the back side where we're gonna raise the shed roof a little bit to be able to, for the door to work, because it's 7 foot back there, so we're gonna have to raise it. And plus it's all rotted back there, so we're gonna have to replace it anyway in kind with wood. And that's to do the sliding door. The sliding door will be a Pella, and it's the 450 series, and it is wood inside and metal clad outside. And at the meeting, somebody wanted to look at the handrail, the rails for the porch, and the way the porch lays out and where the steps come down at. So that is the porch, the back deck, and the landing and the steps will come down the side towards the front of the house. And I really don't need rails on it because it's less than the code requires. But we're going to do basically the same thing we did up front. It's going to be a 6-inch rail, top rail tapered, and a 6-inch bottom rail tapered with 2-inch pickets, square pickets. And we also talked about the vent flues that are in the back of the house, which I don't have a drawing of it. It should be on the pictures that you can see. But the vent flues, one's probably mid-house, the other one's toward the back of the house. And we wanted to take those out because they have no value to the house. The fireplace has most of the value, and the look of it has the value, and you won't see it because it's in the back. You want me to do a song and dance?
You can do a song and dance. I'll get it pulled up, you just give me just a minute to log it.
That's the roof fireplace, and you can see that. This is the existing fireplace that's kind of leaning off the house that we were going to redo. If you look back and to the left, you'll see one of the vent flues, and the other one is, if I'm not mistaken, a little bit further back than that. So it's not really a piece of the house. I mean, it's a piece of the house, but it's not that prevalent in the look of it. And that's the other side view right there. And you can see the one way in the back. Mm-hmm.
So, go back to the one before that.
Back to this one, George?
Yeah.
There you go.
You're proposing to remove that?
I'm sorry?
You're proposing to remove that? That chimney?
No, the existing fireplace, the chimney, is going to stay. It's the one that's to the left and back a little further.
The one we just saw a picture of?
Yeah,
You can see one of them there, the center of the
the one
house.
on top of the roof, the peak.
And then there was another picture showing that one from a different angle.
No, that's another one that's
That's a
in the
different
back.
It's a different one that's a little further back on the ridge.
I'll switch to that one, it'll make a little more sense, and this is the side, the other side.
And that's the one all the way in the back.
we're talking removing 2 ventilators, right?
Yeah,
But not the big chimney
No,
on the
that-
far right.
that needs a
You're
lot of work.
removing the other
It's gonna
thing,
happen.
too. All right, so this is a straightforward view.
So as you see, they just put square columns in. Really, they're just a 4x4 wrapped with metal flashing, basically is what it is.
This is the.
Oh, the shed.
This is the outbuilding. I looked on the Craven and GIS with the property tax card. I cannot find record of it. Pretty sure it's something that's popped up over a weekend. So I do not have a name.
material.
It looks like wood.
Yeah, but it's all different kinds of
These are the elevations that you
No, I
already
did not
showed.
see that.
So essentially we have a stake in
Goes
there.
in and it goes around. It's all.
And, that's the door that we propose now. He changed it out this morning, so my recommendation will adjust a little bit, but this is a metal clad.
It's metal clad outside, wood interior. And there is metal windows. If you look at the picture from the, I don't know if we have a back picture of that house, there is metal windows. There are awning windows up top in the roof. That's the front. I don't think we have a back.
I don't, but I can verify because I have visited the site, and David, I know you visited the site, that those are metal windows in the back. I believe there's 2, 1 over 1, I believe.
They're awning, I think they're awning windows actually.
But there are metal windows in the
Yeah.
rear. And, well,
I'm just looking in the listing for the district, it doesn't specify a material on those windows. However, in relation to the shed, I'll say also that the outbuilding or shed in the back is not listed in its listing in our district as a contributing structure, so the shed is non-contributing.
I figured that shed was built when they did the siding, which is probably 60s, 70s. And then after that, they added to it.
Oh, and it's made of all different kind of materials, it's not all the same material.
Oh, it's definitely, got a lot of material in it.
Yes,
It's got a lot of character right now.
it does, none of it fits together.
Well, we're hoping it's gonna fit together when it's done.
Yes, that, you're not gonna replace that shed,
No, it's coming out.
it's coming down, right?
Yeah.
Okay, do you have anything else to add right now?
That's it.
Okay, let me call for public comment from anyone who might have received notice who would like to speak for or against the application. Yes? And please state your name and address for the record.
Mary Gomez, at 315 Avenue C.
Thank you.
And I appreciate the chance to express my concerns to the board tonight. My main concern is the request for an asphalt roof. Every house, 1406, 316, 315, 312, 309, everyone has the metal roofs, other than one, and that house was built in 1950s, she told me. Your rules state that things should be repaired or replaced in kind. Also, it's been previously stated by the board that cost is not a consideration. As such, I believe a metal roof should be required because the whole area has the metal roofs.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And just to address that, we understand exactly where you're coming from.
Mhm.
However, in the guidelines, it is permissible to replace a metal roof with asphalt shingles. That is absolutely not prohibited. And I'm sure that's where Mr. Core has found that.
Okay.
Thank you, Mary.
Anyone else who has received notice that would like to speak for or against? Okay. Shannon, you've got an opportunity to rebut that testimony if you prefer.
I mean, it's in the guidelines, I can replace it with asphalt shingles.
Correct.
And it almost cost prohibitive to use a metal roof in this case. I'm never regaining my money back off of it.
Okay. Morgan, would you like to present staff findings?
Yes. And just for clarification, before I go down my laundry list, it was stated earlier that the shed is non-contributing, right?
Yes.
Just making sure we're all on the same page with that. Okay. Staff submits the following historic district guidelines as appropriate to this application. Contemporary materials, 556. Roofs, 451, 452, 453, and 456. Demolition, 641. Walls, trim, and ornamentation, 421, 422. Foundations, 421, 422. Windows, doors, and openings, 431, 432. And decks and patios, 462 and 463. And statements of reason based on the information contained in the application and staff's judgment are: the proposed project is located within the primary, secondary, and tertiary ABCs, and the proposed rear door does now comply with the guidelines, so please take out number 2. He changed it this morning. The proposed project is not incongruous with the guidelines, and staff recommends the commission approve the application for major exterior alterations at this time, citing the aforementioned guidelines.
Thank you. Commission, your discussion, any comments, questions, clarifications for the applicant?
No, I appreciate what you're gonna do to this house, because it's a sad-looking house at this point in time. And that you're gonna take down that awful-looking thing in the backyard.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. It's gonna look really, really nice.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful house, it's gonna be a beautiful house. Yes.
It will be once you
10-foot
get done.
ceilings,
Yeah,
we're gonna do tongue and groove ceilings in there.
Yep.
It's gonna be,
once you get done with it. So I appreciate your efforts.
And just for clarification, with regard to the demolition of that accessory structure, it has been classified as non-contributing, and in fact, the first guideline in section 6.4, I think, is demolition, states that demolition cannot be denied for non-contributing structures. So if anyone's wondering why we're not fighting to save it, that's why.
I got a question about the vent flues, and maybe some of my fellow commissioners could help me on this. Probably just a lack of education on my part. They look like chimneys. I know they're venting. What do they vent? They like bathrooms
they
or
could have
something?
been at a stove, they could have been at a lot of things.
So when you take them away, what happens? Isn't there still a need for ventilation there?
No, sir. Actually, they serve no purpose right now, because we will not be using them at all.
Okay.
Plus, they're not in great shape. So literally, if I had to keep them there, there would have to be a lot of work done on them, just like the outside chimney, because they're about in the same shape as the outside chimney.
All right. I guess my concern is that they kind of look like chimneys, but
But there's not a chimney there.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Just
Not a
trying to
chimney
gain
back there, what you're
understanding.
talking about.
Yeah, they've just been
Well,
stacked.
And I understand the confusion, and they are vent flues. They're not. You mentioned like whether it's a plumbing vent. That's a very different thing.
Right.
These they do have brick surrounds, so just like you would think of in a chimney. However, they were built for probably old wooden stoves,
Right.
some other sort of appliance that required fresh air venting and exhaust.
Right. I guess I'm concerned about is that I know we are very protective of chimneys, and to my novice eyes, these just look like another brick attachment to the house that looks a little bit like a chimney. So I was just, but obviously there's a different rationale.
Yes, we just had this discussion in design review
Right,
last
that's where
night as to
that's where I'm getting
how
this
we'll
from.
proceed with chimneys
Okay.
and be fair to everyone.
Yeah, okay,
Um,
I've got some clarification.
Any further discussion or questions? If not, we would entertain a motion.
So moved.
Well, there you go.
Help me out.
Would anyone else like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion. I move that we find the application for a certificate of appropriateness for 314 Avenue C, not incongruous with New Bern's Code of Ordinance, sections 15411 to 15429, and New Bern's Historic District Guidelines, based on the following specific guidelines and findings of fact. The applicable guidelines are contemporary materials, 5.5.6, roofs, 4.5.1, 4.5.2, 4.5.3, 4.5.6, demolition, 6.4.1, walls, trim, and ornamentation, 4.2.1, 4.2.2, foundations, 4.2.1, 4.2.2, windows, doors, and openings, 4.3.1, 4.3.2, decks and patios, 4.6.2, 4.6.3, and the findings of fact that the proposed project is located within the primary, secondary, and tertiary ABCs. The proposed rear door must comply with the guidelines, which you showed us tonight that you have met with Morgan, and the proposed project is not incongruous with the guidelines. I don't believe we need to attach a condition since the rear door material has been changed, and so noted.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. Is there any discussion on the motion as it was made? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion passes. Anyone like to make a motion to issue a COA?
So moved.
Second.
We have that motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes. COA is issued.
Thanks, Shannon.
Thank you.
All right. Are we ready? Okay, the next one is 520 East Front Street. Now, I will note that the applicant has decided no longer to elevate, but they do want to put in the wooden louvers. So that is going to change. This is going to include the installation of wooden louvers in the primary, secondary, and tertiary ABCs. And real quick programming, Sarah, I have to swear you in. Just in the rear? The flood vents are only going to be, the louvers are only going to be in the tertiary? Gotcha. So flood vents only in the tertiary. I will make a programming note of that, and I gotta swear you in. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give this evening is true to the best of your knowledge? And would you like to use the scanner or the laptop?
This one.
It's left. You do. Oh my God. We're good. We're good. Sorry, guys. Okay, let me get you pulled over here. And wait. It's fine. Don't want those. Do you want to?
I didn't bring that application.
I got it.
I was bringing that.
This is for 520, right?
This is, well, this sounds good. Yes.
I got that one. I got it. 520 East Front Street. Okay, guys. So I'm just gonna let Sarah just take it away from here, since there's been a couple of minor changes, so you can go on ahead.
Good evening.
This project, halfway through, the owners decided to not raise the house. So when we submitted it, they were going to raise it 2 feet. Now they've decided not to for various reasons. And so the front elevation of the house will not change at all. The only thing that they're asking for are the wood louvers in the rear where there were actually there were windows originally. They're still filling in portions of their basement. So in this area, right here, kind of on the porch that's going to be rebuilt, and you can't see it, but there was a window here and then here. They want to, as that is being reconstructed, to create a wood louver that can be removable. So it's only in that rear portion, only in a couple areas on that rear porch. They would like to do that. I think they've got one right here underneath this HVAC vent, just on the right side of the house, but nothing on the front on this elevation change. You can actually see that window right there on that old photo. That's it.
Okay, if you've nothing more to add for the time being, is there anyone who has received notice on this application that would like to speak for or against it? Okay, and just a little housekeeping, like on all these, no conflicts of interest among the commission, no issues with application completeness? Okay. Morgan, would you like to provide the staff findings and recommendations?
Absolutely. Staff submits the following historic district guidelines as appropriate to this application. Foundations 411, 412, 413, and 414, and the statements of reason based on the information contained in the application in staff's judgment are: the proposed project is located within the tertiary ABC. The proposed material is appropriate, and the proposed project is not incongruous with the guidelines, and staff recommends that the commission approve the application for major exterior alterations at this time, citing the aforementioned guidelines.
All right, thank you. Any final comments before?
No.
Okay. Commissioners, your discussion, any questions, clarifications for the applicant?
What are the louvers made of?
Preservative treated material, and they'll be painted.
And only in the tertiary, right?
There is no further discussion. Would anyone care to make a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we find the application for a certificate of appropriateness for 520 East Front Street to be not incongruous with New Bern's Code of Ordinance sections 15411 to 15429 and New Bern's Historic District guidelines based on the following specific guidelines and findings of fact. Guidelines are foundations 4.1.1, 2, 3, and 4, and the findings of fact are the proposed project is located within the tertiary ABC. The proposed materials are appropriate, and the proposed project is not incongruous with the guidelines.
Have a motion, do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the motion as offered? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Would someone care to make a motion to issue a COA?
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. COA is issued.
Thank you.
Now, for the other one, do you want to use the scanner, Sarah, or do you want to use the laptop?
I'm gonna start out with the scanner. I just have a video. I'm not sure if you can control.
Yep, you're all set. And you know how to zoom this in, right?
Yeah. This next project is to add a two-car garage and a pool at 511 East Front Street. And I know you've seen this in the one other meeting, and I spent some time out on Linden and just want to talk to you a little bit about the character of the neighborhood kind of before we get too far into the project. This is the house here. This is the front of the house, and this is East Front Street, and this side is Linden. And I went out today and just took a video. Let me see if I can zoom in on this. So this is the front of the house, and then going up towards Linden, well, looking down towards Council Bluffs, and then walking back in the opposite direction up Linden. Their side yard has an existing 6-foot fence, which is what you're considering the primary area of visual concern. Halfway down their house, they have a walkway kind of at this screen porch that goes into their side yard. It's a very grand house, beautiful property. This side yard where they want to locate this pool is very private. There's a hedgerow and the 6-foot fence from the street and from the yard inside. It's just very private. They've got a row of bushes on the outside and then a row of bushes on the inside, and then this picket fence. This is the rear of the house. There used to be a garage there. Flo took it away, so there was a kind of a 2-story garage that faced this property. And then as you continue up the street, there is another garage that's forward of any of the houses there. This is their existing driveway. And then looking up a little bit farther, the house next door to them also has a high picket fence that's about 4 foot high. And then this is the new, I guess the modern house downtown. And then as you continue up, there is another 6-foot high masonry fence in what you would consider the primary area of visual concern, and then which is really the rear of the yard. So my point is that Linden is kind of a back alley. You do have houses that front Linden, you definitely do, but there are also portions of it that if someone were to ask you and come to the commission and say we'd like to put a 6-foot tall masonry fence in our front yard, it wouldn't be allowed per the guidelines. As we go farther up the street, there's a garage in the rear, and there's also the apartment building that also has a high masonry fence at the yard. Looking back down Linden here, and then to just go back here, going into the driveway, just to show you, they have an existing porch here that has a fence, the pergola, and then the pool would be located in this yard here, kind of where that grassy area is. And we didn't want to pull the garage forward to block their back porch, and then they've got a 6-foot wall and another garage in the rear that is facing their property. So just to orient you in that area. In the application, I show the existing and then a series of photos, and then a series of photos that are also existing that we just saw in the video. Their proposed 2-car garage sits right at the rear property. They have an existing lift here, and we've located the entry to the garage in line with the steps so that it's easy to come into the house. This enters right into the kitchen. So you come in here, bring your groceries in here, and you're not interfering with entering in through the living room. And that's why we placed it back here. The guidelines you don't have a guideline for pools. And so we kind of talked about this at design review. What is a pool? And per the rest of the ordinance, they talk about pools as being as a use. So it's under accessory use, but not as a structure. So when we look through our guidelines, I look at, there's two, one for open spaces and then one for landscaping. And both of them they're worded very similarly. It says introduce, it gives some things, and to me, I look at this as this is a focal point to their yard. This is not something that they want to hide away. This is not a use that is going to be tucked away in a corner. This is something that they want to be proud of as a landscape feature, something that will have a fountain, that will provide a nice sound, will be part of their yard in an area that is very private in their yard. And so it says introduce fountains as focal points in spaces that do not obscure historic buildings or their architectural features. There is one other pool facing East Front Street right now, and that's at the Oliver's house, and they are currently filling that in. So to me, it's a temporary thing. I mean, it can be easily gotten rid of just as easily as it would be put here. It's not touching any historic fabric. It is part of the yard. Just as the Olivers found that the hurricane came in and they didn't want their pool anymore, these folks have decided that this is something that they would want to enjoy at this property. The other guideline for landscaping, 2.4.7, it says basically the same thing. Create focal points that highlight ... fountains and structures such as, pergolas and gazebos. I mean, for me, it's not, I mean, I can't stand here with a straight face and say it's a fountain because it's a pool, but it does have a fountain piece associated with it. To me, it's part of the landscape. It's not something that you will see from Linden, and it's not something that you will see from East Front Street. And given the character of Linden, to me, you'll never even know it's there. And especially from East Front Street, you won't know it's there. The garage itself is a single-story structure with 2 garage doors facing Linden. The details to match the house. This portion of it is not higher than the side porch that's right next to the house. This is a kind of what the shape of the pool with the fountain, although we're only proposing 2 feet or 3 feet on either side, and then a larger piece of 9 feet towards the existing pergola. A regular standing seam metal roof and metal garage doors that are kind of to replicate a carriage door. And then the other elevations that would be facing the property lines. And that's it. The materials are all called out on the plans. If you have any questions about those.
All right. We'll move on to public comment. Is there anyone who's received notice about this particular application like to speak for or against?
Yes.
Okay.
My name is Nikki Ingiani. My address is 210 New Street, but I am the owner of 209 Linden, which sits directly across the street from the property we're talking about. And I have to take issue with the fact of calling Linden Street a back alley, because it is not a back alley. You happen to catch it on a day when they haven't picked up the garbage from Hurricane Florence. I'd like to start my comments by saying, first of all, considering the recent hurricane and the large amount of applications that have been coming to the HPC because of the damaged homes that we have downtown. This issue should have had lower priority in the scheme of things. Second thing is, this application also sounds very much like another one that was presented a couple of years ago at the Hollister House by the same architect, I believe. Same kind of pool. It was actually deemed inappropriate for the Hollister House, which is on Broad Street and George. This latest application, let me just go back to my other things. This afternoon, after I looked at the plans of the pool that sits about 12 feet away from the fence, which is a picket fence, it's not a privacy fence, I went out and measured Linden Street, just Linden Street, from curb to curb. It is 13 feet 5 inches. It's a very narrow street. It's not a back alley, but it's a narrow street. And we, as tenants or residents who live on that street, have to park on the sidewalk. So there really isn't even, we're not even talking about a car length away from the other side of the street. So I just want you to keep that in mind. The pool would be 12 feet away from the fence. The fence sits on the curb, and then the curb is only 4 feet maybe, and a 13-foot street. So the houses are very close, is what I'm trying to say, the whole area. The fence, it does sit right on the sidewalk. It is in a primary area of visual concern because it fronts on a public street. It is not private. We can see through the picket fence. It's not a privacy fence. You see right through it. There is no landscape plan submitted for landscaping or for a privacy fence to buffer the view of the pool from the public street or sidewalk. And the neighbors need to see that plan before the application should be acted upon because there is no landscape plan attached to that. Okay, and my last statement is, okay, I mentioned that part. I'm just very concerned about the fact that we are putting a pool in an area that we just had. I myself had 6 inches inside of my house, which is on New Street. And I know that the 2 other pools that are on New Street, there are 2 other pools on New Street besides the Olivers that's coming down. And I know they went under. So to me, it doesn't even seem logical to want to put a pool where we are in the floodplain, and that area, which was the worst streets, was Broad, New, Linden, and Change, got the crux of the hurricane. So to me, it doesn't seem logical to do that. And I just think it would not be appropriate for that neighborhood because the houses are in such close proximity. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
My name is Junko Kada. I live right next to the 511, this house you mentioned. And she didn't show, but between our property, there is a brick fence. Was 2/3 is gone by this hurricane, and it's at the moment I don't even have a contractor to fix it or anything. And also, I live in this house for 13 years.
Not that one. That's not the one that got knocked down. No.
What is that house?
Right.
Oh, that's not, I thought you said the brick wall next door.
Yes, that got knocked down, she said.
I live 202 Linden Street side next to the Johnsons. Anyway, last 13 years, most of the time, my neighbor, Zelma Peter, she maintained a beautiful garden, and it's just like a historic icon for I think it was like a landmark for the corner of East Front and Linden. The beautiful garden, and especially Rose Garden, was like a historic symbol, I thought. And I rather maintain that property to be New Bern's historic beautiful garden to stay. I just oppose to the pool to be installed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we'll give you time for a rebuttal. There are a couple things that I took some notes on that I know I can address. First, as far as a priority of applications, even during this time, we have added extra meetings, specifically this month, to help take up the slack on that. But nonetheless, they are open to anyone who wants to submit an application, whether it's storm-related or not. We've added meetings in order to handle, the greater number of applications, but there is no priority that we're assigning. Made reference to the Hollister House application. I believe the main difference that between that and maybe what's proposed here, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the pool was fully in the tertiary area of that, or close to it, if I'm remembering.
No, this isn't the primary. It was right to the side of the house, which was right in the primary.
Well, then that means secondary.
But that one got approved.
But that one was secondary. It was approved.
But it's
I remember that. But if it was on the side of the house, it was in the secondary area.
exact, yeah, it was.
Okay. And as far as whether it's logical to install one, it's not prohibited, and that's not within our purview to rule on. Would you like to rebut anything further?
Well, a couple of things. Lee and Susan Johnson own this house, and they are trying to sell it. The people who want to buy it have put this application together. They were very concerned about me coming tonight. They live down, it's about an hour away, and they were concerned. They didn't want it to seem frivolous, that there has been all this damage to New Bern, and they're bringing this. We started this process before the hurricane, and so, they are relying on this as an option to purchase the house. And so that's why they felt the need to go forward with it. But they were very, cognitive of that there's been so much damage. They didn't want this to seem frivolous. The other thing is that they're not removing any landscaping. The rose garden that exists there is beautiful. And any landscaping that would be removed would be towards the house, possibly one bush. But everything else, especially along Linden, where, this is along Linden here. They've got 2 rows of bushes inside and out. I know it's not a privacy fence, but you look at this picture here, and that's where the pool would be. That's a high row that's over a 6-foot tall hedgerow right there at Linden. To me, if they built a patio in the same shape and they used it for barbecues or functions, like that, to me it's going to act in a similar fashion. It's a piece of their landscape. The Hollister House pool, that was very much like the Oliver's pool at the corner of New and East Front, where in the side yard it's still visible from the primary area, but not in what would be called the primary area. And the only other thing that I want to say is that the guidelines do talk about the character of when putting in new things to look at the character of the street, and it really is more for placement of structures, and to me this is not a structure, it's an easily removable piece of their landscaping, but I don't know, we kind of took that into consideration for its placement. And that's all I've got.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Morgan, would you like to provide staff findings and recommendations?
Yes. Staff submits the following historic district guidelines as appropriate to this application: accessory structures 261, 262, 263. Statements of reason based on the statements of reason based on the information contained in the application and staff's judgment are: the proposed project is located within the primary ABC as indicated on the diagram found in the guidelines of the historic district on page 1-8. The proposed materials for the shed are appropriate, however, the placement of the pool is incongruous, and therefore the proposed project is incongruous with the guidelines. Staff does recommend the Commission deny the application for major exterior alterations at this time, citing the aforementioned guidelines.
Okay, thank you. Prior to getting into our discussion, I think I'd like to address what's odd about this one. As the applicant stated, we don't have guidelines specifically about pools. Not just their placement, really, not really any guidelines about pools. Our guidelines in general are a good mix of shoulds and should nots in relation to particular things. We discuss practices and concepts that are either encouraged or discouraged. In a few cases, we have guidelines that are actually directives, where something is explicitly required or prohibited. And when we come upon something that's not addressed in our guidelines, it's important for us to consider that just based on that omission, that doesn't necessarily mean something is either automatically disapproved or approved. Either way. What it really means is that we've got to apply our best judgment to what we do know about the guidelines, what the guidelines say about similar things, and draw parallels between, as best we can, between what's proposed and things we know that the guidelines have something to say about. And what's different about this one is not that a pool is proposed, but that a pool is proposed in an area where our guidelines do state that it is a primary ABC. And I don't know if you can put up that diagram that we have in the guidelines.
I have.
Okay. Essentially, because this is a corner lot, it's got two exposures that are primary. And in general, what that means is from the street to not the porch or porch columns, but the main wall of the home on both sides. That constitutes primary. Secondary ABC is from that wall back to a rear wall, and then tertiary is everything in the rear. On a corner lot, there's an awful lot of primary, a little bit of secondary, and very little tertiary.
We're working on getting that diagram.
Okay. In any case, I'm sure we're all familiar with it. But what's odd about this one is that not that a pool is proposed, but it is proposed in the primary ABC. And that is not traditionally where people propose pools, and not even just in the district. That's not where people normally put pools anywhere you go. So that by itself represents a clear departure in tradition. The other thing is where guidelines don't exist, we often attempt to classify that element, as closely as we can to something that we do have guidelines on. I think in this case it's reasonable to conclude that a pool structure is most closely related to an accessory structure as we define them. Yeah. And we have different classes of accessory structures. We've got actual buildings with substantial foundations that we classify as true outbuildings. And then we have others that are described as accessory structures such as sheds, gazebos, pergolas, arbors, trellises, and similar types of site improvements with minimal foundations. All those types of accessory structures, according to the guidelines, are to serve as focal points in rear yard landscapes. I think a pool if we're trying to find something in our guidelines to give us a little bit of guidance as to what's similar, I think that's the closest we're going to find is that classification of accessory structure. Not necessarily the one like the garage is, which is something with a substantial foundation, but these ones that are defined as minimal foundations. And our accessory structures guideline 261 clearly indicates that they're to be located in secondary or tertiary ABCs. And it also specifically states behind primary structures when possible. So I think that all just points to the main reason we had such a discussion at design review about where the pool was, is because just in general, it doesn't make sense for it to be proposed in the primary area of visual concern. And when we look to our guidelines for similar things, I think it's fairly easy to see backup for that. And I just wanted to bring that up in order to sort of guide the discussion and bring up a few points that we ought to consider, since we don't have specific guidelines that mention pools.
And I have pulled up a diagram that you requested, the one that we referenced previously. This is the one that's on the website. It's live. This is on page 1-8. And
correct.
This, in my opinion, would be an actual example.
Correct. And the corner lot that you're looking at, for example, the difference between what's proposed here and what was approved at the Hollister house is which side of the house it's on, which means one is on the street side and one is not. On that corner lot that we're looking at on the screen, the one on the left side I'm looking at, to the right side of the house, from that front wall back to the rear wall, that secondary area, that's where it was in the previous application where it was approved. And like our guidelines state for accessory structures, primary and secondary is okay. Secondary and tertiary is okay, not primary. But what's being proposed here is that it's actually on the other side of the home, which is the primary area fronting the street. And something else that occurs to me, it was presented also that there's currently a 6-foot fence on the property now. If that were proposed right now on somebody's primary front yard, we wouldn't allow it because we only allow 4 feet. We only allow 6-foot fences in a tertiary area. Well, I didn't say that some of them didn't exist. I said we wouldn't allow it because it's contrary to the guidelines. And that's what we need to consider for anything that's proposed. And, I only mention the fence because it happens to, in some people's eyes, benefit from a condition that we wouldn't approve today. So in order to start the discussion on that, I just wanted to go over those items and open it up to any more questions or clarifications for the applicant or further discussion.
I'm curious, perhaps a stupid question, but you call it a landscape feature and it has a fountain. Is this a swimming pool or is this a koi pond?
It's not an accessory structure. Let's just say that. I mean, I don't think that, to me, it's not raised above the ground. It's in ground, in line with the landscape. If it were a patio, if it were a solid patio, you would approve it. Just because it has water in it, you're saying that it's not appropriate. To me, that's ridiculous. A structure is something that has walls, a roof, that has mass to it above. There's already a pergola right there that's technically in the primary area of visual concern. To me, this is not a front yard. It's a landscape feature that is flush with the grade with a fountain. It's not a koi pond. It is not.
It's a swimming pool.
It's a swimming pool.
Okay.
Yes, but to me, if you look at it like a patio with a hole in it, it's a landscape feature. which is allowed in the primary area.
You did read something from the guidelines, I think it was your first statement. Can you tell me what that was again?
So there are two guidelines, 2.2.1, which is guidelines for open spaces. Now, this is public and open spaces, so, I don't know if you can read into that as an open space as being something next to your house. There aren't a lot of houses downtown that have extensive side yards. A couple on East Front Street, the two large federal houses, have very large, extensive side yards with landscaping and walkways. And it says introduce public art, statuary, artifacts, memorials, and fountains as focal points in spaces that do not obscure historic buildings and features. And then again on landscaping in 2.4.7, create focal points that highlight public art, statuary, fountains, structures such as pergolas and gazebos. Place these elements in areas that do not obscure historic buildings and their architectural features. So to me, looking at those two pieces, it's not obscuring anything. It can be easily removed in the future. It's part of the landscaping. It's not removing any of the double row of full height, 6 foot tall bushes on either side of a 6 foot fence, and the rose bushes behind those. Only some up, closer to the house would it impede.
The only raised feature is the fountain?
Only raised feature is the fountain.
Is it true that if this were a patio, we would approve it?
I'm currently looking at, if you'll jump to page 4-11, decks and patios. While she was speaking, I was skimming through it. As Chairman said earlier, we don't have guidelines for everything, but sometimes you just have to draw parallels to things that are closest possible. I'm reading, and it never says patios are allowed in the primary. It just says locate decks, and it's under guidelines, decks and patios, so put it together. Locate decks in secondary and tertiary ABCs.
Where are you reading?
I'm looking at guideline 462.
It just says decks.
Yeah, it just says decks. Decks and patios are listed under the same heading. But again, you'd have to draw those parallels. That's my personal opinion.
Deck being a raised structure off the ground, a patio being something in line, very similar to the federal buildings, the Hand House and the Eckberg House, have extensive side yard, patios, brickwork in the landscaping. And other on the corner of Craven and Johnson, the large white house that has a brick driveway that's a similar corner house, large side yard brick patio opening up, which would be the primary area of visual concern.
Well, in relation to the first guideline that you asked about, 221, it says guidelines for public and open spaces.
Yes.
The paragraph prior to that, the examples it gives are open spaces such as small alley parks, large waterfront parks, neighborhood playgrounds, sculpture gardens. All of those examples are, like it says, public and open spaces. And while it's true that what you're proposing isn't going to obscure anything, the guideline you're referencing, I
The
don't
second
believe
one
it's-
is probably more appropriate. It's worded exactly the same way, 2.4.7 for landscaping. It's the, create focal points that highlight public art, statuary, fountains, and structures such as pergolas and gazebos. Place these elements in areas that do not obscure historic buildings and their architectural features. So it's worded exactly the same, just in the guidelines for landscaping.
I guess what I would say then, if you were proposing this in the tertiary area, it would still be perfectly not incongruent with 2.4.7.
I don't think it's incongruous, you know, in the primary area either. I mean, it doesn't, it says create a focal point. To me,
And
that
that's why,
focal point.
and that's where we differ.
Sorry?
And that's where we differ from what I presented.
As
That's
a
all.
focal point being something in the rear yard.
Well, I'm not gonna argue it with you, it's for our discussion, so, as I said, I think the thing that we can most closely relate this to are the, sort of secondary class of accessory structures, the ones that are, you know, not so prominent. And we list several examples: sheds, gazebos, pergolas, arbors. They are all called out in our guidelines as being appropriate in secondary and tertiary areas, and specifically to serve as focal points in rear yard landscapes, and also specifically behind primary structures when possible. And I think it's important to point out also that if the application is not approved, we're not simply disapproving a pool, we're disapproving this pool whereas proposed. And that's a big difference. We're not saying no one can build a pool. We're not saying they can't use their property in a way that they like. That is to install a pool. Certainly there would be a way to put the application together that they could install a pool in a way where the pool's in the tertiary area.
Kind of hard to do if you live on the corner, though.
Well, there is tertiary area on corners.
Yeah.
I mean, I live on a corner and I could put a pool behind my house. I mean, it is possible to do it,
Yeah.
don't worry about it. I mean,
Is there any discussion on the garage portion, its character? Any questions for the applicant?
I thought in your pictures, it looked like there was a garage already back there. There's not?
It's not, it's their neighbor's garage.
Oh, okay. Because
Yeah.
I thought I see a building back there. Okay, I
Yeah.
got you. That's fine. Yeah, no, I got you. I got you.
I guess I have one other question. Did they consider putting the pool anywhere else?
Yes, absolutely. They considered putting the pool back in this area back here. It's just that they
We don't have
very much wanted, oh,
We
what
lost it.
happened? Oh, there we go. I hit a button. Got it. They looked at putting the pool back here, but they very much wanted a garage. So the only option is to take the garage and bring it up. So it would be in line with this area, which is this open porch on the rear, right here. So that the new garage would then be like blocking their porch, which is, you don't want to look out on your porch and see it walled. And and then plus what you're doing is you're putting your pool in an area that doesn't get any sun. So it just seemed like not a good location for that. And I know they're asking a lot, and this is what they would like to do. This is a grand house, beautiful house for New Bern, and they want to move here and make it theirs and be part of the community. And this is what they would like.
I got two more questions, if I could. Did they consider, what's the dimensions of the pool?
It is 14 by 32.
Okay. And just a question out of curiosity, is this a deal breaker for them buying the house?
Absolutely.
Okay.
this is not easy. As I walk by the house and look at the property, if the pool were there, you wouldn't see it from the street. It's certainly not putting a pool in the front yard, even though it's primary area of the city. And pools aren't mentioned specifically. I think Sarah has a good argument equated with a patio.
I had the same reaction. I walked by there today and I said, oh, I understand. You can't even see it from here.
Yeah.
I'm just sketching ideas, and y'all know I can't draw, so forgive my doodles here. But I was just thinking, and this, just to give an alternate perspective of what might fly, was, okay, if this is their driveway, and this is not their desire initially, but if this was their garage, and they put the pool back over here, can't see it.
That's what I just showed you, which
Well,
is what
we
we looked
discussed
at.
that in a design
Yeah.
review also. It just,
We just looked
it
at
was
that.
chosen not to be.
But they
presented.
didn't, okay.
And so if you put this back here, and you take this and you move it forward, what you're doing is you're taking this feature here, and you're putting your garage in front of this, and, you know, bringing that garage closer to the street, and you're locating, you know, an area that we're calling a focal point, and you're putting it in a rear yard that gets no sun, which to me is not, it's not a usable space.
And we did discuss an arrangement like that at design review as an alternative. However, for whatever reason, this is the application we've got. But I do agree with you that in that alternate configuration, each element would be not incongruous in its location and placement.
It's kind of an interesting thought, though, that, you know, they don't want it there because their view is destroyed from that vantage point, but the public's view is what is perhaps sacrificed, I guess, is the issue.
Well, and there are some negatives as we're seeing here of having a corner lot, but as far as view out from your property, you get twice as much in a corner.
Yeah.
So than their neighbor would with a house on the side.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about compromising a view that most of their neighbors don't even have.
Yeah.
Other question, Mr. Chairman. Let me put it this way. We don't approve things that are not incongruous. Is that correct, or have we ever made an exception?
Well, not incongruous means okay.
I mean, rather incongruous.
Well, yeah, that's the language we use when we find it, when we're going to vote it down.
Right.
Yes.
So we don't approve things that are incongruous with the guidelines under any circumstance.
Correct.
Okay. Just want to understand all this language. My own opinion, we don't state opinions, my own experience with this house is that it is elevated and you wouldn't see this structure at street level. I've walked by this house a lot of times. I've been inside this house several times. I knew the previous owner. So. But I can also clearly understand the concern of those who live adjacent or nearby. So it's just a challenge for us.
Well, it is a challenge in one perspective, however, in another perspective, it doesn't meet the guidelines.
Correct.
So in that perspective, it's not a challenge. But
Correct.
I certainly do understand why they would want to put it there. It's unfortunate that this house sits where it sits.
As a landscape feature, it is congruous.
Well, I hear you calling it a landscape feature, but it's really a swimming pool, right? you don't have in the guidelines.
I'm not talking about whether it's in the guidelines or not, but I don't
It's
think.
not incongruous as a landscape feature, that's all I'm saying.
If there was
you wanna
koi
call
in
a
it, it
swimming
would be
pool a
okay.
landscape feature. I don't think that that swimming pool is given as an example of a landscape feature, but I hear what you're saying, I got you. But I mean, it's just unfortunate how this house sits on this lot. So if this house sat to this side of the corner, like my house sits on the corner, so it would give me the opportunity to put something in my backyard that would fit the tertiary requirements if I wanted to. This house unfortunately doesn't. It sits on one side, so it only has one side left. Like, I couldn't put a pool in my yard, like in my side yard. It sits on a corner, and I have a lot over here, but I can't put that pool in that lot if I wanted to, whatever I call it. So the only place I can put it is behind my fence in the backyard. So that is what we're stuck with, unfortunately.
Well, if we use the definition of accessory structure as the thing we can most closely relate it to, secondary is okay as well. So it's not just the rear corner, it's anything from that front wall on either face towards the back. So in that sense, the side yard where the garage is, from where the garage is all the way to, where that front wall plane is, that's a combination of secondary and tertiary, and anywhere in there is okay. Which is why sliding the garage down and putting it behind is congruous with all the guidelines.
Right.
And the example of George Oliver's pool, which in this case would be to the top of the page in the side yard, they just don't have that side yard here.
So can we move forward with a recommendation?
If someone would like to make a motion, if there's no more discussion.
This is a tough motion to make because once you say it's incongruous, it's voted down.
It's not. You have to vote on it.
You have to vote on it.
Right. If you make a motion that asserts it's incongruous,
Then it's
we
just a
could
matter.
we could still disagree with you, but
Right.
that still doesn't get a COA issue either
Okay,
way.
understood, understood.
You have to say it how you normally would, if you just vote either way. That's very specific in the ordinance. So when you make the motion, it has to be, it's not incongruous, but that is.
No, if I'm speaking, no, if I'm speaking, I can use either choice of language that I prefer. But we're going to vote after I make a motion, if I make a motion. Right now, I'm still pondering if anybody else is going to go forward.
I'm ready, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to make a motion. I move that we find the application for a certificate of appropriateness for 511 East Front Street to be incongruous with New Bern's Code of Ordinance, Sections 15.411 to 15.429, and New Bern's Historic District Guidelines, based on the following specific guidelines and findings of fact. Accessory structures, 2.6.1, 2.6.2, and 2.6.3. And the findings of fact are that the proposed project is located within the primary ABC, as indicated in the diagram, found in the guidelines for the historic district on page 1-8. The proposed materials for the garage are appropriate, however, the placement of the pool is incongruous. Therefore, the proposed project is incongruous with the guidelines.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second?
Okay, just so that we're clear on perfectly understanding your intention. The way you've worded it is an aye vote to pass your motion is to disapprove
Correct.
the COA.
Yes.
So we're all clear on that.
Yes.
Any further discussion on the motion?
And what if the motion were to be voted down? Where would that leave us?
Nowhere, because we still wouldn't have one in favor of the COA unless someone would
Well,
like to
someone
make.
could make another motion, though.
Right, but as of that moment, we'd be back where we started.
Can I ask more than a question? I hate to do this, it's just procedural, because before, it was my understanding that you had to make a motion how you always do, that something is not incongruous, but it's the way that you vote it. That way, that if you do vote it, if it does get approved, then the motion is already there to approve a COA. That you can't make the motion in the negative in the way that you just did. I'm not, this is just from having come here and being part of this process for so long and having to do things over again. I just want to be crystal clear. I wish Scott Davis were here, but it's my understanding that that is always the way that you have to make the motion.
Maureen, do we have clarification on
Do
that?
we have clarification?
At the moment, I do not, and this is merely just trying to keep everyone on the even keel. If this is going to become a sticky issue that we need to resolve, it might be best to continue this until our next meeting so I can discuss, because I see what you're saying. I see both sides. I don't have an answer for you right now, but I can get one.
But your recommendation that was incongruous, right?
My
Staff
recommendation is that
recommendation
it is incongruous and that I recommended denial.
Right.
But just point of order, perhaps just to make sure that we are following everything procedurally correct, perhaps that would be an alternative.
It should be in the ordinance right here, but do you have a copy of the ordinance?
I have my guidelines.
I can call Scott Davis. I mean, that's the understanding is that, so that it always happens that way, and you vote it however you vote it, yea or nay.
But why would we make that as a recommendation when that's not what the recommendation is?
It's not a recommendation, it's the way that it's procedure. You've already discussed your recommendations, you all are gonna vote however you're gonna vote. It's not, I'm not saying one way or the other, just procedurally, that is how it should be.
I have the rules of procedure. I can try to come up with a snap answer.
Don't we go by Robert's rules? Isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, it may be more expedient to do it that way, but I don't see any reason why we can't make the motion any way we want.
We can make a motion any way we
Yeah.
want.
That was made.
Right,
And
we have
second.
one on the table.
Hello. Hi.
We're trying to sort out how.
For my part, I'm willing to wait for clarification if we can get it.
The motion currently on the floor is that it is incongruous with the guidelines, so it means it does not meet the guidelines. Therefore, can they vote in the negative? For example, if they all vote in favor of this motion that's on the floor, do they have to flip it around into the positive? Is this in the inverse? Does that make sense? That's correct. Yeah, that's correct. That's what's happening. Probably the best thing to do at this point, I think, would probably be to ask for a continuance so we can sort
But
this out.
motion before that have said that there's this incongruous.
I've never heard one since I've been here. That's what I was asking.
Yeah, yeah. Let's go
But
through it.
option other than continuing, is just phrase the motion the other way and see how it gets voted. Phrase it affirmatively and it'll pass or not pass.
Correct.
Got it. And does the motion have to be phrased in the positive, or can it be phrased in the negative? Okay, the key is that everyone understands the motion. Got it. Got it, as long as everyone is crystal clear on the motion at hand. Okay, gotcha. Got it. Got it. Okay, thank you. Thank you, bye. Okay. After that intermission, as staff, I strongly would recommend at this point to have a continuance to keep us on the path of righteousness and to sort this out before we make any errors. That's what I would strongly recommend at this moment. And to continue it until the October 30th special meeting. That way, advertisements again, notifications are not necessary, and we can sort out those procedural questions.
What was his response to the question?
As long as everyone is crystal clear on the motion at hand, which is no.
That it can be phrased either way?
Yes.
And I can just say for the record, I was planning on making a second motion after that motion anyway.
Okay, so just the motion on the floor currently from Commissioner McNair is that the proposed project is incongruous with the guidelines based upon the same findings of fact that I mentioned previously. That's the current one on the floor, is to vote it down.
Correct. That's my understanding.
Okay.
And we have a motion that stated that and a second.
Gotcha.
So we're in the discussion of the motion portion of this right now. Which means we can amend the motion.
Correct.
If the motion maker is amenable to it. The motion can be withdrawn if the motion maker is amenable to that and in favor of a continuance also. Or we can simply vote on it.
Or Morgan had the continuous option.
You can choose to vote tonight, or you can request to table/continue it until the next meeting if you would feel more comfortable sorting out those kinks, but it sounds like you guys are ready to make a move.
Well, here's what I'm thinking this means. Since we have a motion, we have a second, we're discussing it now. The only way to suspend the vote on it would be if that who made the motion is amenable to withdrawing. So, is that the case? Are you amenable to withdrawing the motion so that we might pursue a continuance?
I don't think that there's any doubt that the house has two primary ABCs. I don't think there's any doubt that a pool typically would never go into a primary ABC anywhere.
I would agree.
Whether it's in the historic district. And based on the guidelines, I think it's very clear that it's inappropriate and it's not appropriate for the primary ABC. It is incongruous with all of the guidelines. However, I don't want to force anyone's hand if they don't feel comfortable voting on it. And I'm fine with withdrawing and continuing. I think it's very clear cut, but obviously I don't believe that everyone else does. So,
Well, regardless of how we might vote, I think the
Mhm.
issue here is whether we're proceeding correctly procedurally.
right.
And that's what the continuance would be about, is in order to seek clarification on that.
Yes.
Based on what Morgan said, as long as everyone understood that the motion I put before everyone was to deny the certificate of appropriateness.
An argument for against the continuance is there's going to be a different set of players here on the 30th than is in here tonight, I would suspect. And thus, we'd have to go through this whole thing again, which is not impossible, but
So we still have, just for clarification, we have a motion on the floor, first and second. And you go, okay, just making sure we're still on the same page.
Still discussing it.
Still chatting. I got you. I'm just trying to keep up with you.
Your clarification of as long as everyone is clear, for my part, I'm okay with proceeding with that because we just received that clarification from the city attorney.
That was what the man said, as long as everyone understands the motion.
So
And I think y'all got it now.
if the motion maker does not care to withdraw and is satisfied with, the clarification we just received, then I think we move forward and take a vote.
May I have a show of hands, please, when we do that?
Certainly.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
I don't want to withdraw.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That said, is there any further discussion on the motion? Any amendments to discuss? Okay. Once again, hearing none, and let's just be very clear, an aye vote in favor of the motion is essentially voting the COA down. So just so we're all clear on that.
Okay.
All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. By show of hands.
By show of hands, please show your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Thank you.
Any opposed?
Gotcha. Final vote has been noted. Good. And no need to issue COA.
No need.
I have a procedural question. Can a motion be made after a motion has already been made?
The motion has to die for lack of second. So she throws out a motion and nobody chimes in on second, it dies. And that's procedurally how that works.
Okay.
did,
Well, understanding that, I'll stand back.
did you, just ask the question, did you want to make a motion in favor of just the garage without the pool?
I would have
You
made
can't.
a motion my wording would have said that the application is incongruous with the guidelines, but I would have wanted to vote on it anyway, but since we've already done that, that would be probably a moot point, so I won't go down that road.
And
But it just seems that we do have an issue that needs to allow for someone to make a motion that is incongruous, because there might be some time, at some point, where the majority of the commission might want to vote in favor of something, even though it may be stated as incongruous.
Correct.
That's, I think, the point of clarification
Yeah.
we need moving forward. But in this case, it doesn't seem like it'll make any point.
Well, I think the idea there, though, would be if you want to vote in favor of an application,
Right.
by nature, your personal determination is that it is not incongruous. And that's the responsibility
Yeah.
of each of us. So
Right,
I think that makes perfect sense.
Understood. But, so we've already voted, so we're going to end up in the same place, so,
Just trying to make it interesting. Thank you very much for your time.
okay.
Thank you.
Okay. That's a head scratcher.
Okay, we have one remaining, do we not? And I believe,
Yes,
if it's
yes, we do. Let's
for the
roll.
ABC store, then I need someone to vote me out so I can stand over there. So Would anyone care to make a motion to recuse me because I helped prepare the application?
Oh, yes, I do.
Second.
Okay, very good.
All right, just that motion to recuse first was Cox, second was, came from somewhere over here. Thank you, thank you.
We didn't vote on it,
So motion to recuse first came from Dr. Cox, second came from Disby. Are we all in agreement?
Yep.
Everybody in agreement? Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, got it. Okay, David, would you like me to assist you in manipulating this?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'm not, don't know what this computer is doing tonight.
Morgan, does the applicant need to be
Hold on,
sworn in?
yes.
Yeah, this is just a minor.
Okay.
Morgan, do
Ma'am.
we need to swear him in?
The applicant?
Actually, I do have to swear you in.
Yes.
Thank
Okay.
you, James. Thank you, Joe.
Right hand up, or whatever hand up. Do you solemnly swear or affirm, David, that everything you're going to say this evening is true to the best of your knowledge?
I do.
Thank you. Okay. Now let's
All right. Has everyone seen the application? Does anybody have any issues with the application's completeness? Okay. We're ready to go, David.
Have at it. Do your thing.
Okay, I'm gonna start by saying all of this is in the primary ABC,
Thank you.
so if anyone has any issues with that. This is the ABC store, the downtown branch on South Front Street. And they came to our firm with a request to prepare an application just to change the front doors. If anyone's been in there, there's an indoor, there's an outdoor, they swing in opposite directions, they have power assist for accessibility. They're housed in a wooden frame right now with a large transom, a single transom over both doors. And they are wooden doors with 12 divided lights in each one in a solid panel towards the bottom of the door. They are dissatisfied with the wooden doors. They tend to rot on the bottom and deteriorate like wood does, and they're asking to replace them with aluminum full glass storefront doors, very similar to what you see in other storefronts on Middle Street. And there are some other photographs that they included in the application as well, other places where they exist. I did some checking as to how old the building was, and according to the historic district listing, the building was built in 1970. That differs with what is on record at Craven County GIS. I believe it said 1900. Was that right, Morgan?
I believe that's approximate, yes, sir.
Something like that, but
Been modified several times.
Building's been there before 1970.
and I actually included in the application some images from Sanborn maps from both 1904 and 1931. There was a building at that location in 1904. It was not of the configuration that exists now. But what really proves it is in 1931, the site is completely unoccupied. So then I went to our district listings that we have for every property and indicated 1970. So we believe that the aluminum storefront door is perfectly appropriate for a building built in 1970. And there's really not much more to it than that. That's all they want to do is change those doors out. The wooden framing, transom, all that's going to stay.
So just the front doors, not the secondary doors.
Correct.
Okay.
It'll look like Camp Ratty's and MJ's.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And they'll get rid of
Okay, seeing that we have no public left, there are no opponents or, other than the applicant, no other proponents for the application. Do you have any final comments?
Sir.
Okay. Morgan, could you give us staff recommendations?
Staff submits the following historic district guidelines as appropriate to this application: windows, doors, and openings, 431, statements of reason. The proposed project is located within the primary ABC. The proposed materials are appropriate. The proposed project is not incongruous with the guidelines, and staff recommends the commission approve the application.
Okay. Commissioners, any discussion?
No.
Well, in that case, would anybody care to make a motion?
I guess I will. Mr. Co-Chairman, or Chairman, whichever. I move that we find the application for certificate of appropriateness for 318 South Front Street to be not incongruous with New Bern's Code of Ordinance, sections 15411 to 15429, and New Bern's Historic District Guidelines, based on the following specific guidelines and findings of fact. Windows, doors, and openings, 4.3.1. The proposed the findings of fact: the proposed project is located within the primary ABC. The proposed materials are appropriate, and the proposed project is not incongruous with the guidelines.
All right. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second?
Right. Is there any discussion on the motion? All right. All in favor? Any opposed? Okay. Can we have a motion to issue a COA?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
No.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? COA issue. Thank you.
Seeing no one left for general public comment, we can dispense with that. Morgan, is there any new business to discuss?
Not tonight. Just a reminder to everyone watching out there in TV land about our special called meeting on the 30th. It's Tuesday, 5:30 here. It's already been noted on the courtroom door. It's been posted on our website. It's been posted on our social media, so we're covered on all those aspects. And we are still moving applicants along as quickly as possible. If we have to double up meetings like we did this month, we'll do it. That's about it for now.
Thank you. And we definitely appreciate everyone's willingness on the commission to have these special called meetings. And we know that's double duty, but glad to do it for the city. If there's nothing further, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
We got a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? We're adjourned.